Today, we're diving into a really pivotal and honestly tragic moment in modern history. We're talking about China's Great Leap Forward and the absolutely catastrophic famine that came right after. We're going to explore how a nation's incredible ambition for a perfect future led to one of the worst disasters you can imagine.
So, picture this. It's 1949, Tiananmen Square in Beijing. The communist leader Mao Zedong stands up and declares the founding of the People's Republic of China. For the millions of people listening, this was it. This was the promise to transform a country that had been shattered by decades of war into a powerful, modern nation. And that's the huge question we're tackling today, isn't it? How did that dream of prosperity, this grand vision for a communist utopia, turn into a complete nightmare that would end up costing tens of millions of lives? It's a complicated story of ambition, ideology, and just unbelievable tragedy.
To really get how things went so disastrously wrong, we have to start at the beginning. We need to look at how the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, started its monumental task. I mean, the country was in ruins, so their first job was to lock down their power and just start rebuilding from scratch.
So who was calling the shots? Well, this gives you a pretty good idea of the power structure. At the absolute top, you had the Politburo Standing Committee. That was the real engine room of the government. And running the whole show was Chairman Mao Zedong. His personal authority, built up over years of revolution, was basically absolute. He had key guys like Liu Shaoqi and the very capable Zhou Enlai beside him, but make no mistake, Mao was the undisputed top dog. Okay, one of the first and most dramatic things the CCP did was a massive land reform. For centuries, a class of rural landlords had pretty much owned the Chinese countryside. The party's plan was simple and honestly brutal. Publicly shame the landlords, take all their property, and give it straight to the peasants who had been working it. And this whole process was often incredibly violent, with public trials and executions. And the scale of this was just staggering. We're talking about 300 million peasants who got land of their own, many for the first time ever. This fulfilled a huge promise of the revolution and, of course, created a massive base of support for the communists. But that support came at a horrifying price. It's estimated that over 1 million landlords were killed in the process. Now, right as China is trying to get back on its feet, a massive war explodes right on its doorstep. Mao decides to send over 2 million soldiers to fight in the Korean War. The cost was immense. We're talking hundreds of thousands of casualties, including Mao's own son, plus a full U.S. trade embargo. But for the party, the payoff was also huge. They felt they had stood up to a superpower, they defended a fellow communist nation, and that really boosted their credibility and prestige back home. All right, so with their power pretty much cemented, the party moved on to the next big phase. In 1953, China kicked off its first 5-year plan. It was heavily, and I mean heavily, based on the Soviet model. The goal was pretty straightforward: rapidly industrialize the country and bring all of agriculture under collective control. And you know what? At first, the results were incredible. With a lot of help from Soviet experts, China's industrial output just exploded. As you can see here, production of key stuff like coal, iron, and steel didn't just meet the really ambitious targets, they blew right past them. This success created this powerful feeling of momentum, this idea that they could do anything. So, feeling pretty good about all these successes, Mao launches this campaign with a very poetic name, the 100 Flowers Campaign. It was supposedly an open invitation for intellectuals, academics, anyone really, to offer some constructive criticism of the government. The idea was, hey, let's stir the pot a little and get some new ideas flowing.
Well, that backfired big time. The criticism that came in was way more intense than Mao and the leadership ever expected. They were shocked, and they immediately slammed on the brakes. What came next was the anti-rightist campaign, which was a brutal crackdown that went after the very people who had spoken out. At least 500,000 people were purged. They were publicly humiliated, sent to labor camps, or worse. The message could not have been clearer. Dissent is not an option.
And all of this sets the stage for 1958 and the launch of the second 5-year plan. Mao gave it this incredibly bold name, the Great Leap Forward. The goal now wasn't just to catch up with the West, it was to blow past them, to literally catapult China's economy ahead of countries like Britain in just a few years. It was supposed to be a shortcut to a true communist paradise.
Now,
The absolute core of this plan was the People's Commune. Basically, they took all the existing rural farms and mashed them together into these massive state-controlled units. This was a complete re-engineering of society. Private property? Gone. People weren't even allowed to cook in their own homes anymore. Family kitchens were replaced with huge, mandatory communal canteens. The party was now in control of every single detail of your life.
To get this done, a huge propaganda campaign just swept the nation, pushing every single citizen to do their part. This led to some really wild scenes, like the infamous backyard furnace campaign. Peasants were literally ordered to build clay furnaces in their backyards and melt down their own cooking pots, their farm tools, anything metal, to produce steel. Of course, most of it was such terrible quality that it was totally useless.
The dream of the Great Leap Forward was enormous, but its foundations were built on sand. And those deep flaws were about to cause a catastrophe on a scale that is just hard to fathom. Here's where it all goes horribly wrong. You have this gigantic gap between what people were saying and what was actually happening. Local officials were under insane pressure to hit these impossible targets, so they just started to lie. They reported these massive, record-breaking grain harvests that were pure fiction. This chart really shows the delusion. The official reports claim these huge surpluses, while in reality, the actual harvest was collapsing because farmers were off making useful steel instead of, farming.
And here is the fatal consequence of those lies. The central government in Beijing, believing these fake reports, collected its share of the grain from the communes to feed the cities and for export. But since the surpluses didn't exist, the state was effectively taking the very food the peasants needed to survive. They were left with absolutely nothing.
The result was the Great Famine. Modern historians estimate the number of excess deaths at around 45 million people. It remains one of the deadliest man-made disasters the world has ever seen. Entire villages starved to death. It was a direct result of these catastrophic policies.
By 1961, the sheer scale of this disaster just couldn't be hidden anymore. The fallout, both inside the party and on the world stage, would end up reshaping China for decades to come.
Even Mao himself had to publicly admit he'd made mistakes, and he took a step back from the day-to-day running of the country. This left a power vacuum, and it was filled by more practical leaders, guys like Liu Shaoqi and a rising star named Deng Xiaoping. They got to work immediately, reversing the worst policies. They shrank the communes and even started allowing peasants to farm small private plots of land again.
At the same time, the Great Leap completely destroyed China's most important alliance. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was absolutely horrified by Mao's recklessness. Meanwhile, Mao looked at Khrushchev's new policy of peaceful coexistence with the West and saw it as a total betrayal of communism. This ideological fight blew up, leading to a bitter, nasty split between the world's two biggest communist powers.
And here's a fascinating twist. While the country was literally reeling from famine, China was becoming more and more aggressive on the world stage. In '58, it started a crisis with Taiwan. In '59, it brutally put down an uprising in Tibet. In '62, it won a quick border war with India. And the grand finale of this independent streak came in 1964, when China successfully tested its own atomic bomb, cementing its place as a major world power.
So, by the middle of the 1960s, a new, powerful China had absolutely been forged. It was standing on its own, a nuclear power. But this whole transformation came at a human cost that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. And it leaves us with a profound question that still echoes today. What was this new foundation really built upon?